On the night of November 6, 1989, police officers rushed to a modest brick home on Delore Street in St. Louis, Missouri. A frantic emergency call had just come in. Inside the house, they found 16-year-old Tina Issa lying in a pool of blood. Standing nearby was her father, Zane Issa. He immediately told officers what had happened. According to Zane, his daughter had come home angry and demanding money. When he refused, she grabbed a knife and attacked him. Fearing for his life, he said he wrestled the knife away and stabbed her in self-defense. It sounded tragic, but straightforward. A family argument that had spiraled out of control. Case closed. Except there was one problem. Several miles away, hidden inside an FBI evidence locker, was a cassette tape. A tape nobody in the Issa family knew existed. And on that tape was a 7-minute recording that told a completely different story. A story so horrifying that the first translators asked to listen to it reportedly refused to continue. Because what the tape captured wasn't self-defense, it was murder. And the people responsible weren't strangers. They weren't intruders. They weren't criminals who had broken into the home. According to prosecutors, the people responsible were Tina's own mother and father. But to understand why federal agents were secretly recording this family in the first place, and why a 16-year-old honor student ended up dead on her kitchen floor, we need to go back several years. Back to a teenage girl who loved sports, a girl who dreamed of becoming an aeronautical engineer, and a family that believed those dreams were a betrayal. Welcome back to Bright Dawn's True Crime. Tonight's case is one of the most disturbing family murders in American history. It involves a secret FBI investigation, a hidden recording, a high school prom, a teenage romance, and a crime that shocked the entire country. This is the story of Tina Issa. Disclaimer: this video is created for documentary, educational, and commentary purposes. The information presented is based on publicly available sources. Some images may have been modified or enhanced for visual presentation. Viewer discretion is advised. By most parents' standards, Tina Issa was exactly the kind of daughter you would hope to have. She earned good grades. She stayed out of trouble. She had plans for college. Teachers described her as intelligent and motivated. She had even secured a scholarship and hoped to study aeronautical engineering one day. But inside the Issa household, none of that mattered, because Tina wasn't becoming the daughter her parents wanted. Her father, Zane Issa, had been born in the Palestinian village of Beitin. He later moved abroad, married Maria in Brazil, and eventually settled in St. Louis with his family. By the late 1980s, the family operated a small grocery business and appeared, from the outside, to be living the American dream. But behind closed doors, conflict was growing. Tina loved soccer. Her parents hated that. She joined the tennis team. They hated that too. She tried out for cheerleading. Another argument. Every step Tina took toward becoming a typical American teenager seemed to create a new battle at home. And then she met a boy. His name was Clifford Walker. He was 18 years old, polite, well-liked, and by all accounts, exactly the type of young man most parents would happily welcome into their daughter's life. Unfortunately for Tina, her parents were not most parents. The moment they learned about Cliff, the relationship became forbidden. And that only made Tina more determined to keep seeing him. At first, the meetings were innocent. Phone calls, conversations at school, time spent with mutual friends. But eventually, Tina started doing something that terrified her parents. She started making decisions for herself. And once that happened, the conflict inside the Issa home became impossible to contain. The breaking point would arrive at a place that should have been one of the happiest nights of Tina's life: her high school prom. For most teenagers, prom is one of those nights that lives forever in photographs. The dress, the awkward poses, the nervous excitement before walking through the doors. Years later, people often forget the classes they took or the homework they completed, but they still remember their prom. For Tina Issa, prom was supposed to be a glimpse of the future she desperately wanted. A normal future. One where she could make her own choices. One where she could spend time with her friends without fear. One where she didn't have to hide who she was. When the night finally arrived, Tina was excited. Like many teenage girls, she spent time getting ready, thinking about the evening ahead. And accompanying her was Clifford Walker, the boy her parents desperately wanted her to stay away from. Accounts differ on whether Tina and Cliff were officially dating or simply very close friends. But one thing is certain: her parents hated the relationship. To them, Cliff represented something much larger than a teenage crush. He represented Tina choosing her own path, and that was something they could not accept. Despite knowing the risks, Tina went anyway. For a few hours, she got to experience what every teenager hopes to experience: music, friends, laughter, normality. For once, she wasn't the daughter caught in a family conflict. She was just Tina, a 16-year-old girl at prom. But that feeling didn't last long, because while Tina was inside enjoying the evening, her family was looking for her. And eventually, they found her. What happened next sounds less like something from a normal family disagreement and more like a scene from a movie. According to accounts from people who were there, several members of Tina's family arrived at the prom. Among them were her mother, some of her sisters, and at least one male relative. They weren't there to watch. They weren't there to support her. They were there to take her home. Witnesses later described a shocking confrontation. Tina was reportedly cornered inside the women's restroom. Imagine being 16 years old. You're at one of the biggest social events of your high school years. You're surrounded by friends. You're having a good time. Then suddenly, family members appear. Not to congratulate you, not to check on you, but to drag you away. The situation quickly became chaotic. Students watched in confusion. Some had no idea who the adults were. Others realized immediately that something was wrong. Tina had no choice. The evening was over. She was forced to leave. And just like that, one of the few moments of freedom she had managed to create for herself was taken away. For many teenagers, an embarrassing incident at prom would eventually become a funny story, something they'd laugh about years later. For Tina, it became something else, a warning. Because after the prom, the atmosphere inside the Issa household changed dramatically. Whatever patience her parents had left seemed to disappear. The arguments became more intense, the restrictions became stricter, and the surveillance of Tina's life became relentless. They wanted to know where she was, who she was talking to, who she spent time with, what she was planning. Nothing seemed too small. Nothing seemed too insignificant. Every aspect of her life became a potential source of conflict. And as the pressure increased, Tina began turning to the people she trusted most outside her family, her friends. At school, Tina started opening up about what was happening at home. Not always in detail, but enough for people to realize she was scared. Several friends would later tell investigators something chilling. Tina had made a request that at the time sounded dramatic, maybe even unlikely. But after her death, those words would take on a completely different meaning. She told people that if anything happened to her, if she was ever found hurt, if she was ever found dead, they needed to tell police to look at her parents. At the time, nobody wanted to believe such a thing was possible. After all, parents argue with teenagers all the time. Strict households exist everywhere. Family conflicts are common. Murder is not. But Tina seemed genuinely frightened, and unfortunately, she had good reason to be. Because while her friends were worrying about exams, college applications, and weekend plans, The situation inside Tina's home was moving in a far darker direction. In fact, it had become so concerning that school staff had started noticing. One meeting in particular would later stand out. A meeting that should have served as a warning to everyone involved. During a discussion with school officials, one of Tina's sisters referred to her in deeply insulting terms and suggested that she deserved what was coming to her. The comments shocked those present. Guidance counselor Pamela Fournier became so concerned that she issued a direct warning to the family. If they harmed Tina, she told them, they would end up in prison. It was the kind of statement people usually make when they believe they are exaggerating, when they are trying to prevent a tragedy, not predicting one. But in this case, the warning turned out to be disturbingly accurate, because by late 1989, the conflict had spread beyond Tina and her parents. It had infected the entire family. And what investigators would later discover was that some relatives weren't trying to calm the situation down. They were helping make it worse. Meanwhile, completely unaware of these escalating tensions, FBI agents continued recording conversations inside the Isa apartment. At the time, they believed they were gathering intelligence about possible terrorist connections. They had no idea that the most important evidence they would ever collect had nothing to do with terrorism at all. It had everything to do with a teenage girl living under the same roof as their suspect. And in just a matter of weeks, those recordings would capture something nobody was prepared to hear. By the autumn of 1989, Tina Isa wasn't just arguing with her parents anymore. The conflict had spread throughout the family, and that made the situation far more dangerous. Because if a teenager has one strict parent, there is often someone else she can turn to. Another parent, a sibling, an aunt, an uncle, someone willing to listen, someone willing to step in. But Tina was running out of allies, and some of the people who should have been protecting her appeared to be taking the opposite side. What investigators would later uncover was deeply disturbing. In recordings obtained during the federal investigation, members of Tina's own family discussed ways of dealing with her. Not helping her, not understanding her, dealing with her. One conversation involved her older sister, Soraya Salam. According to court testimony, Soraya suggested drastic measures. At one point, she discussed chaining Tina in a basement. At another, she mentioned hiring someone to kill her. Whether those statements were serious or made in anger would later become a matter of debate. But the fact that such ideas were being discussed at all was alarming. Another sister, Fatima Abdel-Jabbar, made comments that investigators found equally troubling. According to prosecutors, she expressed a wish that Tina would simply go to sleep and never wake up. Years later, Fatima would claim she didn't remember making those remarks. But by then, the damage was done. Those conversations painted a picture of a family that had begun viewing Tina not as a daughter or sister, but as a problem they wanted removed. And while those conversations were taking place, another investigation was unfolding in the background, one that had nothing to do with Tina, at least initially. Years earlier, federal authorities had begun investigating her father, Zain Issa. The investigation centered on allegations that he had connections to members of the Abu Nidal organization, a Palestinian extremist group responsible for attacks around the world. To be clear, Tina was never suspected of any involvement, neither was Cliff. The focus was entirely on Zain. Federal agents wanted information, names, connections, evidence. So they obtained permission to monitor communications and secretly record conversations inside the apartment. The operation was extensive. Agents listened to hours upon hours of recordings. Most of it was useless. Family discussions, television shows, ordinary conversations, the kind of material investigators often spend months sorting through. But hidden among those hours of recordings was something unexpected, something the agents weren't looking for. As they reviewed conversations from inside the apartment, they began hearing arguments involving Tina. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Teenagers argue with their parents every day, but over time, the tone became increasingly concerning. There was hostility, anger, resentment, and a growing obsession with Tina's behavior. Agents had entered the investigation searching for evidence connected to terrorism. Instead, they were slowly documenting a family falling apart. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. The government believed the greatest threat connected to the Issa household existed outside the apartment. But the real danger was already inside, and it was getting worse. Meanwhile, Tina continued trying to build a future for herself. She still attended school, still talked about college, still spent time with friends whenever possible. Despite everything happening around her, she hadn't given up on the idea that life could eventually get better, that she could graduate, move out, start her own life. In many ways, those hopes made what happened next even more heartbreaking, because Tina was closer than ever to the future she wanted. She had good grades, a scholarship opportunity, teachers who believed in her, friends who cared about her. She wasn't heading toward failure. She was heading toward success. But inside the Issa household, those accomplishments weren't being celebrated. They were becoming sources of conflict. The more independent Tina became, the more determined her parents seemed to stop her. And by early November 1989, the situation had become explosive. Then came a conversation that would later haunt investigators. The final confrontation was now only days away. And on the night of November 6, 1989, the FBI's hidden microphones would capture something that no investigator, no matter how experienced, was prepared to hear. November 6, 1989. For the Issa family, it began as an ordinary Monday. There were no flashing warning signs, no dramatic events that morning, no indication that by the end of the day, police cars would be parked outside the family's home and detectives would be walking through a crime scene. For Tina, the day was much like any other. She went about her normal routine, spoke with friends, thought about school, thought about the future, the same future she had been fighting so hard to keep. Meanwhile, inside the Issa household, tensions continued to simmer. By this point, the arguments had become so common that they almost blended into daily life. But underneath those arguments was something much darker. Months of resentment, months of humiliation, months of anger. And according to prosecutors, a decision that had already been made. As evening approached, Tina returned home. The house on Delore Street looked exactly as it always had. A modest brick home in a working-class St. Louis neighborhood. Nothing about it suggested that within its walls, one of the most shocking family murders in American history was about to unfold. Unknown to everyone inside, FBI recording devices were operating as usual. The agents who had installed them weren't listening live. The equipment simply continued collecting audio, hour after hour, day after day. The recordings would be reviewed later, and because of that, nobody could intervene. Nobody could stop what was coming. At some point that evening, an argument began. Exactly how it started remains unclear. What is clear is that it escalated rapidly. Voices were raised, accusations were exchanged. The tension that had been building for years finally boiled over. According to evidence later presented in court, Maria confronted Tina about her behavior and lifestyle. The discussion quickly turned hostile. What had probably begun as another family dispute suddenly became something much more dangerous. Then, Zine entered the confrontation. And according to prosecutors, he made a statement that would later become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the entire case. He allegedly told Tina, "Tonight, you are going to die." Imagine hearing those words, not from a stranger, not from a criminal, not from someone breaking into your home. From your own father, the person who was supposed to protect you. At first, Tina may not have believed him. After all, people say terrible things during arguments. People make threats they never intend to carry out. But within moments, it became horrifyingly clear that this was different. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise. According to prosecutors, Zine armed himself with a 7-inch deboning knife. And then the attack began. What happened next would later be preserved on a 7-minute recording. A recording so disturbing that some of the first translators reportedly could not finish listening to it. The tape captured panic, fear, desperation. Investigators later said it was impossible to listen without understanding that a terrified young girl was fighting for her life. Tina screamed, she pleaded, she begged her parents to stop. Again and again, she cried out for help, but there was no help coming. According to the prosecution, Maria held her daughter down while Zane carried out the attack. At one point, Tina reportedly begged her mother to help her, to save her, to do something. Instead, prosecutors said Maria told her to be quiet. For investigators, that detail was almost as disturbing as the murder itself. Because Tina's final hope wasn't directed toward a police officer, or a neighbor, or a friend. It was directed toward her mother, and that hope was shattered. The attack lasted only minutes, but those minutes changed everything. Eventually, the struggle stopped. The screaming stopped, and the apartment fell silent. The recording continued. The microphone kept working, but Tina's voice never returned. What happened afterward was almost as shocking as the murder itself. Because according to investigators, the family immediately began constructing a different story. A story that would later unravel completely. When authorities arrived, Zine claimed that Tina had attacked him. He said she had demanded $5,000. When he refused, she supposedly grabbed a knife and came after him. According to his version of events, he had acted in self-defense. If true, it would have been a tragic case of a family dispute ending in violence. The problem was that the evidence didn't support his story. The medical examiner found numerous defensive wounds on Tina, injuries that suggested she had been trying to protect herself, not attack someone else. Her friends had already warned investigators that Tina feared her parents. And then there was the recording. The one thing Zane didn't know existed. The one witness that couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be manipulated, and couldn't be convinced to change its story. As detectives began comparing Zane's account to the evidence, the truth started emerging. The self-defense claim wasn't simply weak, it was collapsing. And when investigators finally listened to what had been recorded inside that apartment, they realized they weren't dealing with a tragic accident. They were dealing with murder. The discovery would transform the entire case. It would make national headlines, and it would eventually place Zane and Maria Issa on trial for the killing of their own daughter. But before a jury could hear the evidence, prosecutors first had to answer one question, a question that stunned people across the country. Why? Why would parents kill a daughter who was doing well in school? A daughter with a scholarship. A daughter with her whole life ahead of her. The answer would become one of the most controversial and widely discussed aspects of the case, and it would ensure that Tina Issa's name would not be forgotten. In the hours after Tina's death, Zane Issa probably believed his story would hold up. After all, there were no independent witnesses inside the apartment. No neighbors watching through a window, no surveillance cameras, no strangers who could contradict his version of events. It was his word against everyone else's, or at least that's what he thought. What he didn't know was that somewhere inside an FBI office, investigators already possessed the most important witness in the entire case. A witness that had been inside the apartment the whole time, the tape. At first, local detectives focused on the physical evidence, and almost immediately, problems began appearing in Zane's story. According to his account, Tina had demanded $5,000 before attacking him with a knife. but investigators couldn't find evidence supporting that claim. Then there were Tina's injuries. The medical examiner documented multiple defensive wounds, the kind of injuries commonly seen when someone is trying desperately to shield themselves from an attacker, not injuries consistent with someone aggressively pursuing another person. The more detectives looked, the less sense Zane's story made. Then the FBI stepped forward. When local investigators learned that federal agents had secretly recorded conversations inside the apartment, they were stunned. Cases like this rarely come with such extraordinary evidence. Most murder investigations rely on fragments, witness statements, forensic evidence, phone records. Investigators are usually forced to reconstruct events piece by piece. This time, they had something far more powerful. They had the event itself. The FBI handed over the recording. And then came another problem. The tape wasn't entirely in English. Conversations shifted between English, Arabic, and Portuguese. Translators were brought in. But according to accounts from people involved in the case, some of the first translators found the recording so disturbing that they struggled to continue listening. Because this wasn't just evidence. It was the sound of a terrified teenager realizing she wasn't going to survive. As investigators worked through the recording, the story told by Zane and Maria began falling apart. There was no demand for $5,000. There was no evidence that Tina launched the attack. There was no support for the self-defense narrative. Instead, prosecutors believed the tape revealed something very different. A confrontation that escalated into a deliberate killing. For the prosecution, the recording was a gift. Not because it made the case easy, but because it removed so much uncertainty. Jurors would not be forced to choose between two equally plausible stories. The evidence pointed overwhelmingly in one direction. As prosecutors prepared for trial, a picture began to emerge. According to the state's theory, Tina had become the target of a family determined to punish her for rejecting the future they had chosen for her. The irony was impossible to ignore. By almost any American standard, Tina was succeeding. She earned good grades. She had plans for college. She had secured scholarship opportunities. She wasn't involved in drugs. She wasn't getting into trouble with the law. She worked part-time at Wendy's. She played sports. Teachers liked her. Friends admired her. In many households, she would have been considered a model teenager. Yet the very things that made her successful were contributing to the conflict. Tina wasn't following the path her parents wanted. She didn't want to leave school. She didn't want an arranged future. She didn't want someone else deciding who she would marry. She wanted the same thing millions of teenagers want, the chance to choose her own life. And according to prosecutors, that choice sealed her fate. When the trial finally began, reporters packed the courtroom. The case had already attracted national attention, partly because of the murder itself, partly because of the FBI's involvement, and partly because many Americans had never encountered a case quite like this before. The defense fought hard. They challenged the interpretation of the recordings. They argued that Zane had acted to protect himself. They attempted to portray Tina as violent and out of control. At one point, the defense even claimed that she had previously attacked her father with a meat cleaver and kicked his injured leg. But prosecutors countered with witness after witness. Friends, teachers, investigators, experts, and always, they returned to the same point. The evidence, the physical evidence, the recordings, and the fact that Tina herself had warned people what might happen. Remember those conversations she had with friends? The ones where she told them that if anything happened to her, they should tell police to look at her parents. Those statements suddenly seemed less like teenage drama and more like a chilling prediction, almost as if Tina understood the danger long before anyone else did. Eventually, after hearing weeks of testimony, the jury was given the case. The deliberations did not last long. In less than 4 hours, the jurors reached a decision. Both Zain Issa and Maria Issa were found guilty of first-degree murder. For Tina's friends, it was a moment of relief. For prosecutors, it was vindication. For the Issa family, it was the end of everything. But the story wasn't quite over. Because even after the convictions, questions remained. Questions about motive, questions about culture, questions about whether Tina's murder was really about family honor, or whether something even darker was hiding beneath the surface. And one alternative theory would continue to intrigue people for years afterward. When the jury returned guilty verdicts against Zain and Maria Issa, many people believed the story was over. The killers had been identified. The evidence had been presented. Justice had been served. But in the years that followed, another question began circulating among investigators, journalists, and people who had followed the case closely. What if Tina's murder wasn't only about her relationship with Cliff? What if there was another reason? A reason hidden beneath everything else? To understand where this theory came from, we need to go back to the very beginning of the FBI investigation. Remember, federal agents were not investigating Zain because of family problems. They weren't interested in his parenting style. They weren't monitoring Tina. They believed Zain had connections to members of the Abu Nidal organization, one of the most feared terrorist groups operating at the time. For years, investigators suspected that people connected to the organization were involved in planning attacks far beyond the Middle East. And according to federal authorities, Zain had drawn their attention. That was the reason the microphones were installed. That was the reason the recordings existed. That was the reason the murder was captured at all. A few years after Tina's death, federal prosecutors took another step. Zain was indicted on racketeering charges connected to allegations involving terrorist activities. The charges were serious. But something interesting happened. The federal government eventually decided not to pursue the case, not because they suddenly believed Zain was innocent, and not because the evidence disappeared. Instead, prosecutors reached a practical conclusion. Zain was already sitting on death row. Even if he were convicted on the additional charges, it wouldn't meaningfully change his situation. So the case was abandoned. For most people, that was the end of the story, but not for everyone. Over time, an alternative theory emerged. Some observers wondered whether Tina might have known things about her father's activities. Things she wasn't supposed to know, things that could have become dangerous if she shared them. There has never been conclusive evidence proving this theory. No courtroom ever accepted it as fact. No prosecutor built a case around it. But the speculation persisted, partly because people struggled to comprehend the brutality of what happened, partly because Zain's alleged connections raised uncomfortable questions, and partly because some details seemed impossible to fully explain. Was Tina killed solely because she rejected her parents' expectations? Or was there another motive hidden in the background? The truth may never be known. What is known is that the jury rejected the family's version of events. And for the legal system, that was enough. The convictions stood. The appeals failed. And the Issa family began disappearing into the prison system. Judge Charles Shaw sentenced both Zain and Maria to death. For a time, it appeared they would both eventually face execution. But life had other plans. While sitting on death row, Zain's health steadily deteriorated. Years of illness took a heavy toll on him. By 1997, prison officials transferred him to Boone Hospital Center under constant guard. There, surrounded not by family but by correctional officers, Zain Issa died from complications related to diabetes and other health problems. He was 68 years old. The man who had spent years trying to control every aspect of his daughter's life died alone in a hospital bed. Maria's fate was different. In 1997, a court ruled that her role in the crime should be considered separately from her husband's. As a result, her death sentence was reduced to life imprisonment without parole. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars. For years, she maintained that she had been unfairly judged. Supporters argued that she had been dominated by Zane, that she had been trapped in an abusive marriage, that she was more victim than participant. Prosecutors disagreed, the jury had disagreed, and the evidence presented at trial had disagreed. Maria remained in prison for decades. In 2014, she died of natural causes at the Women's Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Missouri. With her death, another chapter of the story came to an end. But Tina's story didn't end there. Because while the people responsible faded into history, Tina became something else, a symbol, not of controversy, not of politics, not of religion, but of lost potential. It's easy when discussing true crime to become focused on the criminals, the investigation, the trial, the shocking evidence. But if you strip all of that away, what remains is a 16-year-old girl. A girl who liked sports, who worked part-time at Wendy's, who dreamed of becoming an aeronautical engineer, who earned good grades, who talked about college, who wanted to attend prom with her friends, who had her entire life ahead of her. Think about that for a moment. If Tina had survived 1989, she would be in her 50s today. She might have had children of her own, perhaps grandchildren. She might have built the career she dreamed about. She might have traveled the world. She might have accomplished things nobody could have imagined. Instead, her life stopped at 16. And that's why, more than 30 years later, people still remember her. Not because of the tape, not because of the courtroom, not because of the headlines, but because every photograph of Tina reminds us of something deeply tragic. She wasn't supposed to become a true crime story. She was supposed to become an adult. When people hear about the Tina Issa case, they often remember the shocking FBI recording, and understandably so. It remains one of the most unusual pieces of evidence ever introduced in an American murder case. But perhaps the real lesson of this story has nothing to do with hidden microphones or courtroom drama. Perhaps it's about what happens when control becomes more important than love, when pride becomes more important than family, and when a young person's dreams are treated as a threat instead of something worth celebrating. Tina Issa wanted a future, and she never got the chance to live it. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to Bright Dawn's True Crime, and let me know in the comments which case you'd like to see next. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the most heartbreaking mysteries aren't about how someone died. They're about the life they never got to live.